Today, we're diving into the life of someone who might just be the most incredible figure from the Middle Ages. But I'm guessing you've probably never even heard of him. His name was William Marshal, and his story, well, it's an absolute epic of survival, skill, and sheer will.
Now look, that's not some modern historian looking back with rose-tinted glasses. That was said by Stephen Langton, the Archbishop of Canterbury, a guy who was actually there, who lived at the same time. This wasn't just flattery. It was a reputation he forged in battle and in the king's court.
So that brings us to the big question, right? How on earth does a boy with no land, no inheritance, and basically no prospects climb his way up to become the most powerful man in England, essentially ruling the entire kingdom? Well, that's what we're here to figure out.
All right, so let's get into it. His story doesn't start with some glorious charge on a battlefield. Nope. It begins in a moment of pure terror, right in the middle of a brutal English civil war they called the Anarchy.
When he was just 5 years old, William's own father handed him over to King Stephen as a hostage. The deal was his dad would surrender a castle. But his dad was bluffing. He used the time to reinforce the castle, basically leaving his little boy to face the king's wrath. Can you even imagine?
So the king, completely furious, threatened to execute little William right then and there. And his father's response? It's just unbelievable. He basically said, "Go ahead. I've still got the hammer and anvil to make more and better sons." I mean, wow. It just shows you what a brutal world this was and how William's life was hanging by a thread from the very beginning.
And this is where luck, or maybe fate, steps in. King Stephen looked at this innocent kid playing in his tent and just couldn't do it. He took pity on him and spared his life. That single moment of kindness is the only reason the greatest knight that ever lived even made it past childhood.
So he survives his childhood, but as a younger son, he's got nothing. No land, no title. He has to make his own way in the world. And how does he do it? By diving into the most dangerous and lucrative sport of the era, the tournament.
Now, you gotta understand, these weren't like the jousting fairs you see in movies. This was the medieval equivalent of Formula One mixed with MMA. It was deadly serious. You'd fight, and if you won, you'd capture your opponent, his expensive warhorse, his armor, and then ransom it all back to him for a fortune. It was the ultimate way for a knight to make a name and a living.
And William Marshal? He wasn't just good at it. He was the undisputed champion. On his deathbed, he claimed he'd beaten and captured over 500 knights. 500. Think about that. He wasn't just a competitor, he was a superstar. This reputation for being unbeatable was his ticket to everything.
And all that fame on the tournament circuit, it got him noticed by the most powerful family in Europe, the Plantagenets. This is where he goes from being a sports hero to a major player in the Game of Thrones.
And his career is just unheard of. He served not one, not two, but 5 English kings. He was a tutor to the heir, a top commander, a reluctant advisor to the infamous King John, and he ended his life as the protector and regent for a child king. He was at the very heart of English power for decades.
And this gives us one of the most legendary stories about him. During a rebellion, the young Prince Richard, the guy we'd later call the Lionheart, charges straight at William. William doesn't flinch. He stands his ground, knocks Richard clear off his horse, and kills the horse right under him just to prove a point. You'd think Richard would hold a grudge, right? Nope. When he became king, he remembered William's guts and loyalty and made him one of his closest men.
And that loyalty paid off, big time. This is really his made-it moment. As a reward, King Richard arranges for him to marry one of the richest women in the entire kingdom, Isabel de Clare. So overnight, the landless younger son becomes the Earl of Pembroke, a mega-lord with huge estates all over the place. He'd finally hit the jackpot.
But just when you think his story is winding down, William Marshal faces his greatest test. And it happens when he's 70 years old, an age when, frankly, most people in the Middle Ages were long gone.
Okay, so picture this. King John's disastrous reign has just ended. England is a total mess. There's a civil war, rebel barons have invited the Prince of France to be their king, and the French have invaded and control half the country. The only thing standing in their way, a 9-year-old boy on the throne and this 70-year-old knight who's been appointed to protect him. So what does this old man do? Does he sit back and give orders? No way. At the decisive Battle of Lincoln, he puts on his own helmet, gets on his horse, and personally leads the charge right into the enemy, completely smashing the rebellion.
And then comes the genius part. Instead of punishing his enemies, he shows his political smarts. He reissues the Magna Carta, giving everyone their rights back, and unites the entire country. The man literally saved England. So, after a life packed with more action than a blockbuster movie, you'd think that would be the end of it. But William's final act and the legacy he left behind is just as compelling.
On his deathbed, he finally fulfilled an old vow he'd made as a young man on crusade. He became a Knight Templar. He was buried in their church in London, the Temple Church, and you can still go and see his effigy there today. It's an incredible, tangible link to this absolute titan of history. But here's the final, weird twist in the tale. The story goes that a bishop he'd argued with put a curse on his family. And get this, William had 5 strong sons. They all inherited his titles, they were all powerful men, but not a single one of them had a legitimate son of their own. The entire male line just vanished. In one generation, it was gone, and all his lands were split up among his daughters.
And that really leaves us with a fascinating question to chew on, doesn't it? The Marshal family name died out, but his actions? They changed history. He saved the English monarchy. He cemented the Magna Carta into law. And through his daughters, his bloodline is literally in almost every royal family in Europe today. So what really matters more for a legacy? That your name lives on, or that a whole kingdom survives because you did?